After being released from Guantanamo Bay and sent back to Australia, Irshad, formerly Susan Peterson, initially lives in poverty and isolation, estranged from her children, who are in Canada, and her parents. Eventually, after a moving reconciliation with her Christian parents, who forgive her and welcome her back into their home, Irshad is able to rebuild her life in Australia. Her parents help her financially and emotionally, and she finds work in her father's company. With their support, she is able to obtain a new Australian passport after her name is removed from the no-fly list, which had been imposed due to her previous associations and CIA restrictions. Once she has her passport, Irshad travels from Sydney to Toronto, Canada. She arranges accommodation through her church at a YWCA center in Toronto and is granted a visa for a 6-month stay. Her main goal is to see her 6 children, who have been adopted by Christian families in Canada after she lost custody during her detention and legal troubles. Why Irshad could not reclaim custody of her 6 children. Despite being allowed to visit her children on weekends, as per the arrangement with the Department of Social Work, Irshad is unable to regain custody for several reasons. Emotional attachment to adoptive families. The main reason given by the Office of Social Work is that her children have become emotionally attached to the 3 Christian families who adopted them. The authorities argue that it would be unfair and traumatic to separate the children from the parents they have bonded with through legal adoption. Long separation and loss of maternal bond. The long period of separation, caused by Irshad's imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay and the subsequent year she spent in Australia, has weakened the maternal relationship. The authorities claim that this severance of the maternal bond means the children are now more closely connected to their adoptive families. Legal decisions and appeals. Irshad's appeals to regain custody are repeatedly denied by the Office of Social Work and, later, by a small claims court in Toronto. The courts uphold the decision that the children's best interests are served by remaining with their adoptive families, citing their emotional well-being and stability. Visitation rights only. Although Irshad is granted visitation rights, she is not allowed to take her children outside Toronto or out of Canada. The children are now legally and emotionally integrated into their new families, and the authorities prioritize their current welfare over restoring custody to Irshad. Summary table. Steps/reason. Details. Return to Canada. Irshad gets passport, travels to Toronto, stays at YWCA, visits children on weekends. Emotional attachment. Children bonded with adoptive Christian families. Authorities won't disrupt this. Long separation. Years apart weakened maternal bond. Children now see adoptive parents as primary. Legal decisions. Appeals denied. Courts uphold social work's decision for stability and best interests. Visitation only. Irshad can visit but not reclaim custody or take children out of Toronto/Canada. In essence, Irshad returns to Canada with the hope of reuniting with her children, but due to the emotional bonds formed with their adoptive families, the long separation, and legal rulings prioritizing the children's stability, she is unable to reclaim custody. She is allowed visitation, but the children remain with their adoptive Christian families. Irshad's struggle to obtain custody of her children in Toronto is a powerful section of For the Sake of My Children, and it highlights the complex intersection of legal and social systems in Canada, especially as they relate to immigrant and Muslim families, religious identity, and the rights of women and children. Here's a detailed breakdown of the legal and social context she encounters. 1. Canadian legal system, child custody and welfare. A. Child welfare approach. Best interests of the child. In Canada, the guiding legal principle in custody cases is the best interests of the child. Children are not considered the property of their parents or community, but as individuals with rights. The Department of Social Work, Child Welfare Authorities, is empowered to remove children from parents if there is evidence of abuse or neglect, and to place them in foster care or for adoption. Secular law. Canadian law is secular and does not give preference to religious law or community customs in custody decisions. This means that, even if a religious community, such as the local Muslim Council, objects, the courts and social services act independently. B. Legal process in Irshad's case. Immediate removal. When Irshad is arrested as a suspected terrorist, her 6 children are immediately taken into the care of social workers, who are described as Christians, atheists, or agnostics. The children are placed in non-Muslim foster homes. Community challenge. The Muslim Religious Council in Toronto raises the issue to criminal court, demanding that the children be placed with Muslim families to preserve their religious identity. Court's ruling. The criminal court ultimately rules that the decision about the children's custody should be made by Irshad herself, even though she is detained at Guantanamo Bay. Legal representatives travel to Gitmo to obtain her wishes. This is a compromise between respecting parental rights and addressing community concerns. C. Adoption and religious identity. Adoption by non-Muslim families. Despite protests, the children are adopted by Christian families across Canada, with the advice that they should not be pressured to convert if they wish to remain Muslim. This reflects Canadian law's emphasis on individual rights and the best interests of the child, rather than religious or community dictates. Muslim community objection. The Muslim community objects strongly, citing Islamic law's prohibition of adoption, as practiced in the West, and the importance of raising Muslim children as Muslims. They organize protests and legal actions, but the secular court system prevails. 2. Social systems and community dynamics. A. Muslim community response. Collective responsibility. The local Muslim community feels a collective responsibility to ensure the children remain within the faith. They organize demonstrations, submit petitions to the mayor, and pursue legal action to influence the custody decision. Religious law versus secular law. The community's position is rooted in Sharia law, which forbids adoption as practiced in the West and requires that Muslim children be raised as Muslims. This creates a direct conflict with Canadian secular law. B. Social stigma and pressure. Pressure on Irshad. Even while detained, Irshad is under immense pressure from the Muslim community, her late husband's family, and international Muslim organizations to ensure her children are not adopted by non-Muslims. There are accusations of coercion and demands for independent verification of her wishes. Public debate. The case becomes a topic of national debate in Canada, touching on issues of multiculturalism, religious freedom, and the integration of immigrants. 3. Key legal and social principles at play. Principle/issue. Canadian law and practice. Muslim community perspective. Best interests of the child. Paramount. Children's welfare is the priority. Community/family rights and religious duty. Adoption. Legal, common, and can be cross-religious. Forbidden in Sharia. Only guardianship, kafala, allowed. Religious upbringing. Not a legal requirement. Children may be raised in any faith. Essential. Children must remain Muslims. Parental rights. Respected, but can be overridden for child welfare. Parental/community authority is paramount. Community influence. Advisory, not binding. Courts are independent. Community is expected to have a say. Legal process. Secular courts, due process, legal representation. Religious councils, Sharia courts. 4. Outcome and impact. Mother's decision. Ultimately, Irshad, from Gitmo, requests that her children be adopted by Christian families, believing this is in their best interest given her own spiritual transformation and traumatic experiences. Community backlash. The Muslim community refuses to believe she made this decision freely, suspecting coercion or forgery. They request to send Muslim leaders to Gitmo to verify her wishes, but this is denied. Legal finality. The court's decision is final, and the children are adopted into Christian homes, with the understanding that their religious identity is their own choice. 5. Broader context and real-world parallels. Canadian law. Canadian courts have a long history of prioritizing the best interests of the child, even when this conflicts with religious or cultural norms. The law does not recognize religious law as binding in custody or adoption cases. Multiculturalism. Canada's multicultural policy encourages respect for diversity, but not at the expense of individual rights or child welfare. International law. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Canada is a signatory, also prioritizes the child's best interests and right to a safe, nurturing environment. Summary table. Legal and social systems in Ershad's Toronto custody battle. Systems/actor. Role/influence in the case. Department of Social Work. Immediate removal and placement of children. Prioritizes child welfare over religious identity. Criminal Court. Final authority on custody. Rules in favor of parental rights, but within secular law. Muslim Religious Council. Organizes protests, legal challenges, and community pressure. Seeks to preserve religious identity. Canadian law. Secular. Prioritizes best interests of the child. Does not recognize Sharia in custody. Public opinion. National debate on multiculturalism, religious freedom, and integration. Ershad, mother. Ultimately empowered to decide, but under immense social and emotional pressure. Here's a detailed breakdown of the court proceedings, the role of social workers, and the community's legal arguments in Ershad's custody battle in Toronto, as depicted in For the Sake of My Children. 1. Court proceedings. A. Initiation of the case. When Ershad is arrested as a suspected terrorist, her 6 children are immediately taken into the care of Canadian social workers and placed in non-Muslim foster homes. This triggers a strong reaction from the local Muslim community, who organize protests and legal challenges, demanding that the children be placed with Muslim families. B. Legal arguments and hearings. The Muslim Religious Council in Toronto files a complaint with the criminal court, arguing that the children should be raised as Muslims and not be adopted by non-Muslim families. They cite religious obligations and the importance of preserving the children's Islamic identity. The Department of Social Work, Child Welfare Authorities, argues that, under Canadian law, the best interests of the child are paramount. They maintain that children are not the property of their parents or community, and that adoption by non-Muslim families is legal and sometimes necessary for the child's welfare. C. The court's ruling. To balance these competing interests, the criminal court rules that the decision about the children's custody should be made by Ershad herself, even though she is detained at Guantanamo Bay. Legal representatives from Canada travel to Gitmo to obtain her wishes directly. Ershad, after a period of spiritual transformation, requests that her children be adopted by Christian families, believing this is in their best interest. The court accepts her decision as final. D. Aftermath and finality. The Muslim community refuses to believe that Ershad made this decision freely, suspecting coercion or forgery. They request to send Muslim leaders to Gitmo to verify her wishes, but this is denied by the authorities. The court's decision is upheld and is not subject to appeal. 2. Role of social workers. A. Immediate response. Upon Ershad's arrest, social workers take custody of her children and place them in foster care with non-Muslim families. The social workers are described as Christians, atheists, or agnostics, reflecting the secular nature of Canadian child welfare services. B. Child welfare principles. Social workers operate under the principle that the best interests of the child are paramount. They are responsible for ensuring the children's safety, well-being, and emotional stability, regardless of religious or cultural background. They argue that, since children are often removed from abusive parents and placed with other families for their welfare, Ershad's children should not be treated differently simply because of their religion or background. C. Adoption process. After the court's ruling, social workers facilitate the adoption of Ershad's children into Christian families across Canada. They advise the adoptive families not to pressure the children to convert if they wish to remain Muslim, emphasizing respect for the children's autonomy. D. Navigating community pressure. Social workers face significant pressure from the Muslim community, who organize protests and legal challenges. Despite this, they remain committed to following Canadian law and the court's decision. 3. Community's legal arguments. A. Religious and cultural grounds. The Muslim Religious Council and broader community argue that, according to Sharia law, adoption as practiced in the West is forbidden, and that Muslim children must be raised as Muslims. They claim a collective responsibility to ensure the children's religious identity is preserved. They organize demonstrations, submit petitions to the mayor, and pursue legal action to influence the custody decision. B. Legal strategies. The community files a complaint with the criminal court, seeking to overturn the Department of Social Work's decision and arguing that the children should be placed with Muslim families or relatives in Saudi Arabia or Australia. They argue that, in Islam, children are not to be adopted by non-Muslims and that their religious upbringing is a matter of community and parental rights. C. Response to the court's decision. When the court rules that Ershad herself should decide, the community is initially pleased, believing she will choose to have her children raised as Muslims. However, when she chooses Christian adoption, they refuse to accept the decision, suspecting coercion or forgery. They request to send Muslim leaders to Gitmo to verify her wishes, but this is denied. The court's decision is final, and the children are adopted into Christian homes. Summary table: key actors and their roles. Actors/group. Role in proceedings. Criminal court. Final authority. Balances parental rights, child welfare, and community concerns. Upholds secular law. Social workers. Immediate removal and placement of children. Prioritize best interests of the child. Muslim Religious Council. Organizes protests, legal challenges, and community pressure. Seeks to preserve religious identity. Ershad, mother. Ultimately empowered to decide, but under immense social and emotional pressure. Adoptive families. Advised to respect children's autonomy regarding religious identity. Ershad's decision to return to Pakistan after losing the custody case for her children in Toronto is a pivotal moment in For the Sake of My Children. Her motivations are deeply rooted in maternal love, trauma, and a sense of unfinished responsibility. Here's a detailed explanation based strictly on the content of the novel. Why Ershad returns to Pakistan after losing custody. 1. Emotional devastation and maternal instinct. After the Canadian courts and social services finalized the adoption of her 6 children by Christian families, Ershad is overwhelmed by grief and a sense of failure. She feels she has lost all her children forever, and without them, her life is meaningless. This emotional devastation is compounded by her inability to regain custody through legal appeals in Canada. 2. Unresolved loss, her missing sons. While 6 of her children are now adopted and safe in Canada, Ershad is haunted by the fate of her 2 kidnapped sons, Abu Bakr and Omar. These boys were abducted by militants on the Pakistan-India border during her earlier escape from Afghanistan, with the intention of recruiting them as child soldiers for jihad. Despite all her suffering, she cannot accept leaving them to such a fate. 3. Maternal duty and guilt. Ershad's sense of maternal duty is relentless. She feels responsible for the suffering and loss of all her children, but especially for the 2 sons who were taken from her by force. She believes that, while her adopted children in Canada are safe and cared for, her missing sons are at risk of being indoctrinated, abused, or killed as terrorists. This drives her to take action, even at great personal risk. 4. No other path to healing. After exhausting all legal avenues in Canada and being unable to reunite with her adopted children, Ershad feels she has no other way to find meaning or closure except to search for her lost sons. She decides to return to Pakistan, fully aware of the dangers, because she cannot bear the thought of abandoning them to a life of violence and exploitation. 5. The search for redemption. Ershad's journey back to Pakistan is also a search for redemption. She hopes that by rescuing her sons, she can atone for the choices and circumstances that led to their suffering. This quest is portrayed as both a maternal mission and a spiritual one, reflecting her ongoing struggle with guilt, faith, and the hope for a better future for her children. Supporting excerpts from the novel. She concluded that she lost all her 9 children forever, and without her offspring her life became meaningless, and she failed miserably in her tragic life, which knew nothing but torment, persecution, abuse, rape, and imprisonment. Once again, those ugly suicidal thoughts began to torment her mind. But her new faith in the Lord Jesus Christ as a Christian woman born again prevented her from killing herself. She somehow believes that eventually her gracious Lord will work out a miracle and bring these beloved children back to her again. When she failed to win custody of her 6 adopted children through appeal, Irshad took the matter to a small claims court in Toronto. Unfortunately, the court ruled in favor of the social work office's decision. The failure of the mother, Irshad, to regain custody of her children led her to make a hasty decision based on heart emotions and not her mind reasoning. She decided to return to Pakistan to search for her 2 kidnapped sons, Abu Bakr and Omar. Without telling her parents or anyone else at her church in Sydney, she changed her return ticket and rebooked a flight from Toronto to Islamabad via London. She has decided that no matter what price she must pay or what risk she must take, she must return to Pakistan and search for her 2 missing sons. She knows and understands that at least her adopted 6 children are well cared for in Canada. She will not want to leave her 2 sons to be used by Satan as suicide terrorists in India or Pakistan, to blow up their bodies in smithereens in jihad for the sake of Allah, and to kill innocent people as their terrorist father did in America. Summary table. Irshad's motivations for returning to Pakistan. Motivation. Description. Emotional devastation. Overwhelmed by loss after losing custody of her children in Canada. Maternal duty. Feels responsible for the fate of her 2 kidnapped sons, Abu Bakr and Omar. Guilt and redemption. Seeks to atone for her perceived failures as a mother by rescuing her sons. No other path to healing. Unable to find closure or meaning in Canada, sees searching for her sons as her only option. Hope for their future. Believes her sons' only chance for a better life is if she finds and saves them. In summary, Irshad returns to Pakistan because, after losing her children's custody in Canada, she is driven by grief, guilt, and an unbreakable sense of maternal responsibility to search for her 2 missing sons. She cannot accept leaving them to a life of violence and exploitation, and this quest becomes her new purpose and hope for redemption. Precautions before flying back to Pakistan. Travel arrangements. Irshad changes her return ticket from Toronto to Islamabad via London, without telling her parents or anyone at her church in Sydney. Disguise and safety. She changes from Western clothing into Islamic dress, abaya and niqab, before arriving in Pakistan, knowing that appearing as a Western woman would expose her to sexual harassment and danger. She recalls that in the regions she will visit, women without a male guardian are at high risk, and strict dress codes are enforced. Preparation for risks. Irshad is aware of the dangers, terrorist activity, risk of being accused of apostasy, and the possibility of being targeted by militants or authorities. She takes care to hide her identity, avoid drawing attention, and prepares herself mentally for the risks of traveling in a conflict zone. Irshad's search for her 2 missing sons, Abu Bakr and Omar, is a harrowing and dangerous journey, shaped by her determination as a mother and the extreme risks of operating in conflict zones. Here's a detailed account based on the novel. How Irshad begins the search. Motivation and context. After losing her legal battle for custody of her 6 children in Canada, Irshad is overwhelmed by grief and guilt. She decides that, since her children in Canada are safe and cared for, she must try to find her 2 missing sons, who were kidnapped by militants years earlier on the Pakistan-India border. She is haunted by the fear that they may have been recruited as child soldiers or killed in jihadist violence. Preparation and precautions. Before leaving Canada, Irshad makes careful preparations. She changes her return ticket from Toronto to Islamabad via London, without telling her parents or anyone at her church in Sydney. She changes from Western clothing into Islamic dress, abaya and niqab, before arriving in Pakistan, knowing that appearing as a Western woman would expose her to sexual harassment and danger. She recalls that in the regions she will visit, women without a male guardian are at high risk and strict dress codes are enforced. Arrival and initial steps. Upon arrival in Pakistan, Irshad hides her identity, using the name Iman Atta and claiming to be an American Muslim widow. She blends in with the refugee population and avoids drawing attention to herself. She begins her search in the Swat Valley, a region known for militant activity and the presence of Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. She starts by making discreet inquiries among women's circles and private religious gatherings, knowing that direct contact with men or authorities could be dangerous. Building networks. Irshad befriends local women, especially those who might have connections to the militant networks or knowledge of missing children. She is cautious about whom she trusts, as revealing her true identity or intentions could put her at risk of being accused of espionage, apostasy, or collaboration with Western authorities. Following leads. She learns from a retired former terrorist leader who lost his limbs in an ambush that her sons were last seen fighting in the Swat Valley. Risks involved in the search. Physical danger. The regions Irshad travels through are rife with militant activity, terrorist groups, and ongoing conflict. Foreigners, especially women, are at risk of kidnapping, violence, and sexual assault. She faces the constant threat of being caught in crossfire, bombings, or targeted attacks by militants or security forces. Legal and political risks. As a woman traveling alone, especially one with a Western background and a history of association with known terrorists, her late husband, Irshad risks being accused of espionage, apostasy, or terrorism by local authorities or militant groups. She must avoid detection by both Pakistani and Indian authorities, as crossing borders without proper documentation can result in arrest, imprisonment, or worse. Social and cultural risks. In conservative regions, women are not allowed to travel alone or interact freely with men. Irshad must maintain her disguise, adhere to strict dress codes, and avoid any behavior that could draw suspicion. She is at risk of being ostracized, attacked, or reported by locals if her true identity or intentions are discovered. Emotional and psychological risks. The search is emotionally grueling, as Irshad is forced to confront the possibility that her sons are dead or have become radicalized. She faces repeated disappointment, danger, and the trauma of reliving her own past abuses and losses. Summary table. Step. Details. Risks involved. Preparation. Changes ticket. Adopts Islamic dress. Hides identity. Risk of exposure. Suspicion at borders. Arrival in Pakistan. Uses false identity, blends in with refugees. Risk of arrest, harassment, or violence. Search strategy. Discreet inquiries among women, builds local networks. Risk of betrayal, being reported to militants or authorities. Following leads. Contacts former militants, follows information about son's last known whereabouts. Risk of entering conflict zones, being caught in violence or targeted by militants. In summary, Irshad's search for her missing sons is a journey marked by extreme caution, resourcefulness, and emotional resilience. She faces physical, legal, social, and psychological risks at every step, navigating a landscape shaped by conflict, suspicion, and the ever-present threat of violence. Her determination as a mother drives her forward, even as the dangers and heartbreak mount. Nadia Noor is an important secondary character in For the Sake of My Children. Here's a detailed account of who she is and how her friendship with Irshad develops, based strictly on the novel's content. Who is Nadia Noor? Background. Nadia Noor is an American woman, originally named Mary, who converts to Islam and marries a Frenchman, John, who also converts and takes the name Mohammed Noor Al-Fransawi. Together, they leave their comfortable Western lives and move to Pakistan, seeking to immerse themselves in true Islam. They enroll in a prestigious madrasa, Islamic religious school, in Pakistan, where they study the Quran, hadiths, and Islamic law. This madrasa is notorious for producing future jihadists and suicide bombers, with a curriculum focused on memorizing scripture, learning about jihad, and emulating the Prophet Muhammad's life. Disillusionment. After moving to Pakistan and experiencing real Islam as practiced in the madrasa and among the mujahideen, both Muhammad Noor and Nadia become disillusioned. Nadia, in particular, is shocked by the misogynistic practices, polygamy, and violence she witnesses. She finds herself trapped in a world of extremism, unable to escape, and ultimately regrets her conversion. How Irshad becomes Nadia's friend. Meeting in the Swat Valley, Irshad and Nadia meet in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, after Irshad returns from Canada to search for her two kidnapped sons. By this time, Nadia is living in the Mujahideen camps with her husband, who has become a senior terrorist leader. Both women are Western converts to Islam who have become trapped in extremist environments and are deeply disillusioned by the realities they face. Bonding over shared trauma, their friendship develops quickly because of their shared backgrounds and suffering. Both are white Western women who converted to Islam for love, only to find themselves abused, isolated, and betrayed by the men and the religious systems they trusted. Nadia confides in Irshad about her misery and her desire to escape with her children and return to America. Irshad, in turn, shares her own tragic story and her determination to find her missing sons. Mutual support and trust. Encouraged by Nadia's openness, Irshad trusts her and reveals some of her secrets, though she initially hides her return to Christianity. They support each other emotionally, and Irshad promises to help Nadia escape if she is serious about leaving her husband and Pakistan. Over time, their friendship deepens, and they become each other's confidants and allies in a hostile environment. Spiritual influence. Irshad encourages Nadia to start praying to Jesus Christ even before she manages to escape. Nadia follows this advice, apostatizes from Islam, reconverts to Christianity, and begins praying to Jesus from her heart. This spiritual solidarity further cements their bond. Summary table. Character, background and role. Connection to Irshad. Nadia Noor. American convert to Islam, married to French convert, Muhammad Noor, trapped in jihadist camps, becomes disillusioned and seeks escape. Meets Irshad in Swat Valley, bonds over shared trauma, becomes close friend and spiritual ally. In summary, Nadia Noor is an American woman who, like Irshad, converts to Islam for love and is drawn into a world of religious extremism and abuse. Their friendship is forged in the crucible of shared suffering, mutual support, and a longing for freedom and spiritual truth. Together, they help each other survive and ultimately reclaim their identities. Here's a detailed account of Nadia Noor's story and her connection to Irshad, based strictly on the content of the novel For the Sake of My Children. Nadia Noor's background. Original identity. Nadia Noor was originally named Mary, an American woman who converted to Islam. She married John, a Frenchman who also converted and took the name Muhammad Noor al-Fransawi. Conversion and migration. Both were drawn to Islam by idealized portrayals in the West, believing it to be a religion of equality and peace. After converting, they left their comfortable lives in Paris and moved to Pakistan to immerse themselves in true Islam. Life in Pakistan. They enrolled in a prestigious madrasa in Pakistan, notorious for producing jihadists and suicide bombers. The curriculum focused on rote memorization of the Quran and Hadiths, indoctrination into jihadist ideology, and glorification of martyrdom. Nadia was initially enthusiastic, but soon became disillusioned by the misogyny, polygamy, and violence she witnessed. Nadia's disillusionment and suffering. Marriage and abuse. After graduating from the madrasa, Muhammad Noor quickly rose through the ranks of the Mujahideen, becoming a senior terrorist leader. Nadia, meanwhile, was forced to live in the Mujahideen camps, isolated and subjected to the strictest interpretations of Islamic law. Polygamy. Her husband took multiple wives, including underage girls, which deeply hurt and shocked Nadia. She was forced to accept this due to religious justifications and the threat of being labeled an apostate. Motherhood and entrapment. Nadia had 2 children with Muhammad Noor. She was not allowed to participate in military training, as women's jihad was defined as serving their husbands or bearing children, and she became increasingly desperate to escape the environment for the sake of her children. How Nadia and Irshad become friends. Meeting in Swat Valley, Irshad meets Nadia in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, after returning from Canada to search for her two kidnapped sons. By this time, Nadia is living in the Mujahideen camps with her husband, who is now a senior terrorist leader. Shared experience. Both women are Western converts to Islam who have become trapped in extremist environments and are deeply disillusioned by the realities they face. They bond quickly over their shared backgrounds, trauma, and longing for freedom. Mutual support. Nadia confides in Irshad about her misery and her desire to escape with her children and return to America. Irshad, in turn, shares her own tragic story and her determination to find her missing sons. Encouraged by Nadia's openness, Irshad trusts her and reveals some of her secrets, though she initially hides her return to Christianity. They support each other emotionally, and Irshad promises to help Nadia escape if she is serious about leaving her husband and Pakistan. Nadia's spiritual journey. Apostasy and return to Christianity. Irshad encourages Nadia to start praying to Jesus Christ even before she manages to escape. Nadia follows this advice, apostatizes from Islam, reconverts to Christianity, and begins praying to Jesus from her heart. This spiritual solidarity further cements their bond. Desire to escape. Nadia is determined to leave Pakistan and return to America with her children, but the risks are immense. Her husband's status as a wanted terrorist makes escape nearly impossible, and she fears being arrested or killed by Pakistani authorities or militants. She also fears being handed over to the CIA as the wife of a notorious terrorist. The escape plan and aftermath. Planning escape. Irshad and Nadia plan to escape together, aiming to cross the dangerous Pakistan-India border and seek asylum in India, following the same route Irshad had used years earlier. They know the risks: arrest, violence, or being caught by militants. Betrayal and complications. Just before their planned escape, Nadia is unexpectedly summoned by her husband's men, Pakistani police with militant ties, and is unable to leave. Irshad, fearing for her friend's safety, ultimately tips off the CIA about Muhammad Noor's location, leading to a dramatic raid and his arrest. Nadia is eventually freed and reunited with her children in America, where she becomes an advocate for abused Muslim women, founding a branch of the association started by Irshad. Key themes in Nadia's story. Idealism to disillusionment. Nadia's journey mirrors Irshad's. She is drawn to Islam by idealized promises, only to be confronted by harsh realities of misogyny, violence, and loss of autonomy. Survival and resistance. Despite immense suffering, Nadia finds the courage to reclaim her faith and identity and to help others escape similar fates. Solidarity and sisterhood. Her friendship with Irshad is a lifeline, providing emotional support, practical help, and spiritual encouragement in the darkest circumstances. Summary table. Stage. Nadia's experience. Conversion. Converts to Islam, marries French convert, moves to Pakistan for true Islam. Disillusionment. Faces misogyny, polygamy, violence, and isolation in Mujahideen camps. Motherhood. Has 2 children, is denied autonomy, and is trapped by her husband's status as a terrorist leader. Friendship with Irshad. Bonds over shared trauma, supports each other, plans escape. In summary, Nadia Noor's story is one of hope, betrayal, and resilience. She is a Western woman who converts to Islam for love, only to be trapped in a world of extremism and abuse. Her friendship with Irshad is transformative, helping both women survive, reclaim their identities, and ultimately become advocates for others. Nadia's journey from idealism to activism is a powerful testament to the strength of solidarity and the possibility of redemption. Nadia Noor is not allowed to participate in jihad, military, training in the Taliban stronghold, and the madrasa for several reasons rooted in the religious, cultural, and gender norms of the extremist environment depicted in the novel. 1. Religious doctrine and gender roles. In the Taliban and similar extremist interpretations of Islam, jihad in the sense of armed struggle is considered an obligation for men, not women. The religious tradition, as taught in the madrasa and enforced by the Taliban, holds that a woman's jihad is not on the battlefield, but in fulfilling her domestic and marital duties. The Prophet Muhammad is cited as saying that a woman's jihad is to perform the Hajj, pilgrimage, or to serve her husband. In the camps, this is interpreted to mean that women's religious duty is to endure pain and submission in marriage, not to fight or train for combat. 2. Strict gender segregation and control. Women and girls are strictly segregated from men and boys. In the madrasa and mujahideen camps, men and boys are trained for jihad, while girls and women are confined to domestic roles, cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, and providing sexual pleasure to their husbands. Women are denied education beyond religious instruction and are not allowed to participate in public life, let alone military activities. Nadia, like other women, is confined to her tent and is not permitted to leave without a male guardian. 3. Cultural and social expectations. The Taliban and similar groups enforce a patriarchal system where women are seen as needing protection and control, not as active participants in warfare. Allowing women to train for jihad would violate deeply held beliefs about gender roles and the honor of the community. Nadia's jihad is defined as enduring the hardships of marriage, including polygamy, abuse, and submission, rather than taking up arms or receiving military training. 4. Narrative evidence from the novel. The novel explicitly states, according to Islamic law, a Muslim woman is not obligated to participate in a jihad war for the sake of God. The Messenger of God, may God's prayers and peace be upon him, said, a woman's jihad is fulfilling her duty with Hajj rituals or going to pilgrimage to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Another Islamic tradition said that the Muslim woman's jihad is in her husband's bed. In other words, the more pain she feels during intercourse, the wailing and bewailing she makes due to the penetration of the man's cock into her pussy, the more she will fulfill her duty of jihad in the path of God. This passage shows that Nadia, like all women in the Taliban stronghold, is excluded from military training and instead is expected to endure pain and submission as her religious duty. 5. Summary table. Aspect. Nadia's experience in Taliban stronghold. Jihad training. Not allowed, reserved for men and boys. Women's role. Domestic servitude, child-rearing, sexual submission. Religious justification. Women's jihad is Hajj or serving husband. Cultural norms. Strict segregation, patriarchal control. Personal impact. Isolation, disillusionment, desire to escape. In summary, Nadia is not allowed to participate in jihad training because, in the interpretation of Islam, women's religious duty is limited to domestic and marital roles, not armed struggle. This is enforced through religious doctrine, strict gender segregation, and cultural expectations, leaving Nadia and other women isolated, oppressed, and excluded from any form of military or public participation. Here's a detailed, side-by-side comparison of Nadia and Irshad's experiences in the Mujahideen stronghold, primarily in the Taliban-controlled Swat Valley and Afghan camps, based strictly on the content of the novel. Backgrounds and arrival. Irshad, Susan Peterson. Australian, originally Christian, converts to Islam for love, marries Mustafa, and is drawn into Saudi and then Afghan society. Arrives in Afghanistan as the wife of a Saudi mujahid with children after years of escalating abuse and isolation in Saudi Arabia. Her entry into the Mujahideen camps is involuntary. She follows her husband out of fear for her children's safety and because she cannot legally or physically escape with them. Nadia Noor. American, originally Mary, converts to Islam in France, marries Muhammad Noor, a French convert, and together they move to Pakistan seeking true Islam. Arrives in the Swat Valley after years in a madrasa, motivated by religious zeal and idealism, but soon faces the harsh reality of extremism and gender oppression. Life in the Mujahideen stronghold. Daily life and gender roles. Irshad. Confined to a tent, denied education, forbidden from leaving without a male guardian. Responsible for domestic chores, child rearing, and sexual submission to her husband. Witnesses and endures forced marriage, polygamy, FGM, and the indoctrination of her sons for jihad. Experiences extreme deprivation, no toilets, no privacy, rampant disease, and constant threat of violence. Nadia. Also confined to domestic roles, denied education, and forbidden from public life. Her jihad is defined as enduring pain and submission in marriage, not military struggle. Isolated from her husband, who is increasingly absorbed in militant activities and polygamy. Experiences the same deprivation, filth, and lack of autonomy as Irshad, but with the added shock of realizing the gap between the Islam she was taught in the West and the reality in the camps. Marriage and family. Irshad. Marriage to Mustafa becomes a source of control, violence, and humiliation. Endures polygamy, forced to accept her husband's marriage to an underage girl. Her children are at risk. Sons are indoctrinated for jihad, daughters face FGM and forced marriage. After Mustafa's death, loses all legal rights to her children, who are placed under the control of Taliban leaders. Nadia. Marriage to Muhammad Noor deteriorates as he becomes a terrorist leader and takes multiple wives, including minors. Left to raise her children alone, with little support or affection. Experiences betrayal and isolation as her husband's priorities shift to jihad and polygamy. Fears for her children's future and her own safety, especially as she becomes disillusioned with the ideology around her. Religious indoctrination and jihad. Irshad. Sees her sons trained for jihad, taught to hate infidels, and prepared for suicide missions. Girls are denied education, forced into early marriage, and subjected to FGM. Religious texts are used to justify every form of abuse and control she and her children experience. Nadia. Witnesses the indoctrination of boys for jihad and the glorification of martyrdom. Is not allowed to participate in jihad training. Her religious duty is defined as submission and suffering. Becomes increasingly horrified by the violence and the use of religion to justify cruelty. Psychological impact and coping. Irshad. Suffers from depression, PTSD, and suicidal thoughts, but endures for the sake of her children. Experiences profound isolation, loss of identity, and repeated trauma. Ultimately, her suffering leads to a spiritual crisis and a return to Christianity, fueling her later activism. Nadia. Experiences shock, disillusionment, and despair as the reality of life in the camps contradicts everything she was told about Islam. Isolated, unsupported, and increasingly desperate to escape. Eventually reconverts to Christianity, inspired by her friendship with Irshad and her own suffering. Escape and resistance. Irshad. Makes repeated, dangerous attempts to escape with her children, facing legal, cultural, and physical barriers at every turn. Endures imprisonment, torture, and loss, but never gives up hope of saving her children. Her activism and testimony become a form of resistance and healing. Nadia. Desires to escape, but is trapped by her husband's power, the surveillance of the Taliban, and the risk of being killed for apostasy. Finds hope and solidarity in her friendship with Irshad, who encourages her to pray and plan for escape. Her eventual reconversion and desire to help others become her form of resistance. Summary table. Nadia versus Irshad in the Mujahideen stronghold. Aspect. Irshad, Susan Peterson. Nadia Noor, Mary. Origin. Australian, Christian Muslim Christian. American, Christian Muslim Christian. Entry. Follows husband, trapped by law and children. Follows husband, motivated by idealism. Daily life. Domestic servitude, isolation, abuse. Domestic servitude, isolation, betrayal. Marriage. Polygamy, violence, loss of children. Polygamy, neglect, loss of love. Children. Sons indoctrinated, daughters abused. Children neglected, fears for their future. Jihad. Sons trained, girls denied education. Excluded from jihad, witnesses indoctrination. Coping. Depression, PTSD, spiritual crisis, activism. Disillusionment, despair, reconversion. Escape. Repeated attempts, activism as resistance. Trapped, plans escape, finds hope in friendship. Transformation. Survivor, advocate, voice for abused women. Survivor reconverts, seeks to help others. In essence, both Nadia and Irshad are drawn into the Mujahideen's stronghold by love and idealism, only to be confronted by the brutal realities of religious extremism, gender oppression, and violence. While their backgrounds differ, their experiences converge in suffering, disillusionment, and the eventual reclaiming of their voices and identities, often through solidarity with each other and a return to their original faiths. Their stories highlight the psychological, social, and spiritual costs of life under Taliban rule and the resilience required to survive and resist. When Irshad, the protagonist, is searching for her two missing sons, Abu Bakr and Omar, in Pakistan and India, she receives crucial information about their fate through her friend Nadia Noor. What Irshad learns from Nadia. Nadia Noor is an American woman who, like Irshad, converted to Islam and ended up trapped in the Taliban stronghold. She becomes Irshad's confidant and ally during their time together in the Swat Valley. After Irshad spends months searching for her sons, Nadia uses her connections and local knowledge to gather information from reliable sources about what happened to them. The fate of Abu Bakr and Omar. Abu Bakr, Nadia discovers that Irshad's son Abu Bakr was recruited by the terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba. He participated in the infamous terrorist attack on the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai, Bombay, India. Abu Bakr was killed by Indian commandos during the operation. Omar. Nadia learns that Omar was killed in an American drone airstrike on the Mujahideen in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, where he had been taken and used as a child fighter. This news is devastating for Irshad, who realizes that both of her sons were lost to the cycle of violence and extremism she had fought so hard to escape. She blames herself for their fate, feeling that her decisions and the circumstances of their escape led to their deaths. The trauma of losing her sons to terrorist recruitment and violence haunts her, and she considers it one of the most painful consequences of her years of suffering and displacement. Summary table. Son. Fate. Abu Bakr. Kidnapped by militants, recruited by Lashkar-e-Taiba, killed in Mumbai terror attack. Omar. Kidnapped by militants, killed in a U.S. drone strike in the Swat Valley. This revelation marks a turning point for Irshad, deepening her grief and sense of loss, and fueling her determination to save her remaining children and expose the dangers of religious extremism. Why Irshad decides to help Nadia escape. 1. Shared experience and empathy. Irshad and Nadia Noor become close friends in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, after both have endured years of abuse, disillusionment, and entrapment in extremist environments. Both women are Western converts to Islam who were initially drawn to the faith by idealized promises of equality, peace, and spiritual fulfillment. However, after moving to the heart of the Mujahideen strongholds, they both experience the harsh realities of misogyny, violence, and the loss of personal freedom. Their friendship is built on mutual understanding and the recognition that their stories mirror each other. Both were deceived by the positive image of Islam presented in the West. Both are trapped in environments where escape seems impossible. And both are mothers desperate to protect their children from the cycle of abuse and indoctrination. 2. Nadia's desperation and Irshad's compassion. Nadia confides in Irshad about her suffering. Her husband, Muhammad Noor, has become a notorious terrorist leader, taken multiple wives, including underage girls, and is responsible for countless acts of violence. Nadia is isolated, powerless, and fears for her children's future. She expresses her desire to escape, return to America, and leave behind the life of oppression and danger. Irshad, having already escaped similar circumstances herself, feels a deep sense of responsibility and compassion for Nadia. She recognizes that Nadia's situation is dire and that, without help, Nadia and her children may never escape the cycle of violence and extremism. 3. Moral and spiritual motivation. Irshad's decision to help Nadia is also rooted in her renewed Christian faith and her belief in the moral imperative to help others in need. She recalls the parable of the Good Samaritan from the Bible, which teaches the importance of selfless compassion and aiding those in distress, regardless of personal risk. This spiritual conviction motivates Irshad to put Nadia's safety above her own and to act as a true friend and ally. 4. Practical considerations and planning. Irshad understands the immense risks involved in helping Nadia escape. The Taliban and local authorities would punish any woman caught trying to flee, and the consequences could be fatal. Nevertheless, Irshad uses her experience and knowledge of escape routes, border crossings, and the refugee system to devise a plan. She advises Nadia to avoid official channels, like the American embassy, and instead attempt to cross the border into India, where she could seek asylum as a refugee, just as Irshad had done before. 5. A sense of duty and redemption. Irshad's willingness to help Nadia is also influenced by her own sense of guilt and the desire for redemption. She has witnessed and, at times, inadvertently contributed to the suffering of others, such as her advice to Scheherazade, which led to tragedy. Helping Nadia escape becomes a way for Irshad to atone for past regrets and to ensure that at least one more woman and her children can be saved from the fate she herself barely escaped. In summary, Irshad decides to help Nadia escape because of their deep friendship, shared trauma, and mutual understanding, her compassion and moral conviction, her practical knowledge of escape, and her desire to do good and redeem past mistakes. This act of solidarity and courage is a pivotal moment in the novel, highlighting the power of empathy and the importance of women supporting each other in the face of overwhelming adversity. Here's a detailed account of Irshad's escape plan for Nadia Noor. The escape plan. Step-by-step details. 1. Assessment of risks and environment. Irshad and Nadia are both trapped in the Swat Valley, a Taliban and Al-Qaeda stronghold in Pakistan. They know that any woman caught trying to escape, especially with children, faces severe punishment, possibly death. The area is heavily policed by both Taliban fighters and local authorities, and women are not allowed to travel alone without a male guardian, mahram. Nadia's husband is a notorious terrorist leader, making her situation even more dangerous. 2. Avoiding official channels. Irshad, drawing on her own failed attempts to use embassies and official refugee channels, advises Nadia not to approach the American embassy or try to leave Pakistan through airports or official border crossings. Doing so would likely result in arrest, interrogation, or being handed back to her husband or the Taliban. Instead, Irshad recommends a clandestine escape across the Pakistan-India border, specifically through the disputed and dangerous region of Kashmir, as she herself had done previously. 3. Timing the escape. The two women plan to escape during the Friday noon prayers. In this society, all men are required by law and religious custom to attend communal prayers at the mosque, leaving the streets and checkpoints less guarded. This window, when the male population is occupied, is the safest time for women to move without attracting immediate suspicion. 4. Preparation and logistics. Disguises. Both women plan to wear full Islamic dress, abaya and niqab, to conceal their identities and blend in with local women. Travel companions. They consider hiring a local man to pose as a husband or relative if needed, as women traveling alone are at high risk. Route. The plan is to travel by foot, animal, or local transport to avoid main roads and checkpoints, heading toward the border region. Supplies. They prepare food, water, and essentials for themselves and their children, knowing the journey will be long and dangerous. Cover story. If stopped, they are prepared to claim they are visiting relatives or seeking medical help, using plausible local stories to avoid suspicion. 5. Contingency planning. Irshad warns Nadia about the dangers of the journey, the risk of being caught by Taliban patrols, Pakistani police, or border guards, the threat of sexual violence, and the possibility of being robbed or abandoned by guides. She also prepares Nadia for the possibility of being detained by Indian soldiers upon crossing the border, as happened to Irshad herself. In that case, the plan is to claim refugee status and seek help from the United Nations office in New Delhi. 6. Secrecy and trust. The escape plan is kept secret from everyone except the two women. Even Nadia's children are not told the full details until the last moment, to prevent any accidental disclosure. Irshad also arranges for a babysitter for Nadia's children during the initial phase, to avoid suspicion while Nadia is being summoned by her husband's men. 7. Backup communication. Irshad, having learned from her own experiences, keeps a line of communication open with trusted contacts outside the valley. She later uses her connection with her American friend, the Good Samaritan guard from Guantanamo, to alert the CIA about the whereabouts of Nadia's husband, which becomes a parallel operation to the escape plan. 8. Execution and last-minute changes. The plan is nearly derailed when Nadia is unexpectedly summoned by her husband's men before the planned escape. Irshad adapts by agreeing to care for Nadia's children and continues to monitor the situation, ready to act when the next opportunity arises. She also considers reporting the terrorist leader's location to authorities, balancing the safety of her friend with the risk of retaliation. In summary, the escape plan is a carefully orchestrated, high-risk operation relying on secrecy, timing during Friday prayers, disguises, and Irshad's knowledge of local dangers and refugee systems. It is shaped by the lessons Irshad learned from her own harrowing escapes and is motivated by her determination to help Nadia and her children find freedom and safety. The escape plan for Nadia is put on hold due to an unexpected development involving her husband's men. Here's what happens in detail. Just before the planned escape, timed for Friday noon prayers, when the streets would be less guarded, Nadia is suddenly summoned by her husband's men. These men are not just ordinary Taliban fighters. They are members of the Pakistani police and intelligence, ISI, who are extremely dangerous and have high authority in the region. Nadia is told she must go to meet her husband, the terrorist leader Muhammad Noor, at a hotel. She cannot refuse or delay, as the men sent to fetch her are watching her closely and would not allow her to escape alive. Nadia explains to Irshad that every time her husband wants to see her, she is taken to a different hotel or city, and she has no control over the timing or location. Because of this sudden summons, Nadia cannot proceed with the escape as planned. She must comply with her husband's orders and go with his men, leaving her children behind with Irshad for safekeeping. Nadia promises Irshad that if she survives this meeting, she will try again to escape the following Friday, but for now, the plan must be postponed for her safety and the safety of her children. In summary, the escape plan is put on hold because Nadia is forcibly taken by her husband's men, who are connected to the Pakistani police and intelligence, to meet her husband, making it impossible for her to attempt escape at the planned time without risking immediate detection or violence. This interruption highlights the constant surveillance, lack of autonomy, and ever-present danger faced by women in the Mujahideen stronghold, and the need for Irshad and Nadia to adapt their plans to survive. Irshad's decision to help the CIA capture Nadia's husband, Mohammed Noor, a notorious French convert who became a senior terrorist leader, is a pivotal moment in For the Sake of My Children. Here's how and why she makes this choice, with detailed context from the novel. How Irshad decides to help the CIA. 1. The situation with Nadia. Irshad and Nadia Noor have become close friends in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, both trapped in the stronghold of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Nadia is desperate to escape her marriage to Muhammad Noor, who has become a high-ranking terrorist leader, taken multiple wives, including underage girls, and is responsible for orchestrating attacks and sending young men on suicide missions. Nadia confides in Irshad about her misery, her desire to escape, and her fear for her children's future. 2. The escape plan is derailed. Just as Irshad and Nadia are about to attempt their escape, timed for Friday prayers, when the streets would be less guarded, Nadia is unexpectedly summoned by her husband's men, members of the Pakistani Police and Intelligence, ISI, to meet Muhammad Noor at a hotel. Nadia cannot refuse or delay, as she is under close surveillance and any attempt to escape at that moment would be fatal. She leaves her children with Irshad for safekeeping and promises to try again later, but the plan is put on hold. 3. Irshad's moral dilemma and decision. Irshad is deeply concerned for Nadia's safety and the safety of her children. She knows that as long as Muhammad Noor remains at large, Nadia will never be free, and many more innocent people will be at risk due to his terrorist activities. Irshad also feels a sense of responsibility, as she has promised to help Nadia escape and has seen firsthand the devastation caused by men like Noor. 4. Contacting the CIA. Irshad recalls her connection to her Good Samaritan American Guard from her time in Guantanamo Bay. She decides to use this connection to alert the CIA about the whereabouts of Muhammad Noor. She calls the Guantanamo Detention Center, asks to speak to her former guard, and explains the situation. The guard takes her information seriously and passes it on to senior CIA agents. 5. Cooperation and conditions. The CIA instructs Irshad to follow Nadia and the men who have come to take her to her husband, to find out the exact location and hotel where Muhammad Noor will be staying. Irshad is told to call a local number and report the location as soon as she knows it. She sets conditions for her cooperation. She wants assurances that neither she nor Nadia will be harmed, and that Nadia will be allowed to return to America and be received as a hero, not as the wife of a terrorist. The CIA agrees to her terms, though Irshad is skeptical about whether they will keep their promises. Why Irshad decides to help the CIA. 1. To save Nadia and her children. Irshad's primary motivation is to help her friend Nadia escape the cycle of abuse and violence. She knows that as long as Muhammad Noor is free and powerful, Nadia will never be safe. By helping the CIA capture him, Irshad hopes to give Nadia and her children a real chance at freedom. 2. To prevent further terrorism. Irshad is acutely aware of the harm caused by Noor's terrorist activities. She sees helping the CIA as a way to prevent further attacks and save innocent lives, both in the region and abroad. This is also a way for her to atone for her own past, having lived among terrorists and witnessed their crimes. 3. A sense of duty and redemption. Irshad's decision is also driven by her sense of moral duty and her desire for redemption. She has seen the consequences of inaction and regrets past decisions that led to tragedy for others, such as her advice to Scheherazade. Helping the CIA is a way to make a positive difference and to use her knowledge and connections for good. 4. Practical realities. Irshad recognizes that the only way to truly help Nadia is to remove the source of her oppression. Reporting Noor's location to the CIA is the most effective way to achieve this, given the resources and reach of American intelligence. In summary, Irshad decides to help the CIA capture Nadia's husband out of compassion for her friend, a desire to save innocent lives, a sense of moral responsibility, and the practical understanding that this is the only way to break the cycle of violence and oppression for Nadia and her children. She uses her unique position and connections to orchestrate the operation, despite the risks to herself, and negotiates for Nadia's safety as part of her cooperation. Muhammad Noor's decision to relive the golden period of Islam is a pivotal theme in the novel, and it is deeply tied to his radicalization, his experiences in the madrasa, and his rise as a terrorist leader. Here's a detailed look at how and why he makes this decision. 1. Background and conversion. Noor is originally a Frenchman who converts to Islam, adopting the name Muhammad Noor al-Fransawi. Along with his American wife, Nadia, he leaves a comfortable life in Paris to seek true Islam in Pakistan. Both are initially drawn to Islam by the idealized version presented to them in the West, a religion of peace, equality, and honor for women. They are told Islam is free of racism and offers spiritual fulfillment. 2. Immersion in the madrasa. Noor and Nadia enroll in a prestigious madrasa in Pakistan, which is notorious for producing suicide bombers and jihadist leaders. The curriculum is centered on memorizing the Quran and Hadiths, learning Sharia law, and especially the obligation of jihad. The madrasa glorifies the early Islamic conquests and the golden age of Islam, teaching that Islam must be spread by the sword, and that martyrdom brings great rewards in paradise, including the promise of 72 virgins. 3. Ideological indoctrination. Noor is indoctrinated with the belief that the decline of the Muslim world is due to the abandonment of jihad and the caliphate. He is taught that the only way to restore Islam's former glory is to revive the practices of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, namely, spreading Islam through violence, enforcing strict Sharia, and waging holy war against non-Muslims and apostates. The madrasa's teachings are not just theoretical, they are designed to create leaders who will actively work to re-establish the caliphate and the supremacy of Islam as it existed in the 7th century. 4. Military training and rise to leadership. After graduating, Noor is sent to the Swat Valley for military training with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. He excels in bomb-making, guerrilla tactics, and suicide operations. Noor's intelligence, adaptability, and commitment quickly earn him promotions. He becomes a Qaid Harbi, military commander/Amir, responsible for training and leading hundreds of young mujahideen. 5. Decision to relive the golden period. Noor's decision is both ideological and practical. He sees himself as a restorer of the lost Islamic empire, aiming to re-establish the caliphate, enforce Sharia law in its strictest, most literal form, wage jihad against the infidels non-Muslims, especially Westerners, and apostates, glorify martyrdom and the rewards of paradise as motivational tools for his followers. He models his actions and leadership on the Prophet Muhammad and the early caliphs, believing that only by returning to these roots can Islam regain its power and purity. 6. Impact and consequences. Noor's actions have devastating effects. He becomes one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, orchestrates attacks, and is responsible for the deaths of many innocents. His wife Nadia, initially a fellow convert, becomes disillusioned and seeks to escape, realizing the reality of reliving the golden period is one of violence, misogyny, and oppression. Summary table: Muhammad Noor's path to reliving the golden period of Islam. Stage: Key actions and beliefs. Conversion. Drawn by idealized Islam, seeks true faith in Pakistan. Madrasa indoctrination. Memorizes Quran/Hadith, learns jihad is a duty, glorifies early Islamic conquests. Military training. Learns bomb-making, guerrilla tactics, suicide operations. Leadership. Becomes Amir, leads and trains hundreds, orchestrates attacks. Ideological goal. Restore caliphate, enforce strict Sharia, wage jihad, revive Golden Age practices. Consequences. Becomes most wanted terrorist, causes suffering, wife seeks escape. In essence, Muhammad Noor's decision to relive the golden period of Islam is driven by his radical indoctrination, the glorification of early Islamic conquests, and his belief that only by returning to the roots of jihad, Sharia, and the caliphate can Islam be restored to its former power. This decision leads him down a path of violence, leadership in terrorism, and ultimately, personal and familial tragedy. Here's a vivid description of Muhammad Noor, also called Sheikh Muhammad Noor al-Fransawi, in the hotel, surrounded by his 4 wives and other maids, as depicted in the novel. Muhammad Noor in the hotel, surrounded by his 4 wives and maids. Inside the hotel, Muhammad Nur al-Fransawi is portrayed as a figure of immense power and indulgence. He is surrounded by his 4 Muslim wives, each from different backgrounds: his first wife Nadia, an American convert, 2 underage Afghan girls, and a young Pakistani girl. The scene is reminiscent of the opulence and excesses of historical caliphs or sultans. The atmosphere is one of luxury and authority. Noor is not only attended by his wives, but also by numerous housekeepers and maids from various tribes in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Even Arab women, who might have held higher status elsewhere, are reduced here to the role of servants, catering to the needs and whims of the great French Muslim caliph. The narrative draws a parallel between Noor and the legendary Abbasid caliphs, emphasizing that even the Prophet Muhammad did not receive such glorification and a multitude of beautiful harems. Noor's presence dominates the room. He is depicted as a man who has everything at his disposal: beauty, youth, and servitude. Each of his wives and maids is described as being available to him, not just for companionship but for sexual pleasure, as justified by his interpretation of religious texts. The narrative notes that, according to Noor's beliefs, all these women, whether wives or maids, are permissible for him to sleep with, without the sanctity of marriage, under the guise of religious law. The scene is one of both grandeur and moral decay. Noor is likened to the infamous Caliph Harun al-Rashid, surrounded by luxury, women, and servants, living a life of excess and indulgence. The hotel becomes a symbol of his power, his ability to command loyalty and fear, and his complete control over the women in his life. The narrative underscores the contrast between the glorification Noor receives from his followers and the exploitation and subjugation experienced by the women around him. Key details from the scene. Noor is surrounded by 4 wives and many maids from different ethnic backgrounds. The women serve him, and he is treated with reverence, almost as if he were a caliph or sultan. The atmosphere is one of luxury, but also of exploitation and control. Noor's power is reinforced by the presence of armed guards and the fear he inspires. The narrative draws explicit parallels to historical figures known for their harems and excesses. The emotional experience of the wives and maids. 1. The wives. Isolation and powerlessness. Each wife, regardless of her background, feels the weight of Noor's authority. The American wife, Nadia, for example, is acutely aware of her loss of agency. Once a woman with dreams and choices, she now finds herself one among several, her individuality blurred by polygamy and the expectations of obedience. The younger Afghan and Pakistani wives, married off as minors, experience a mix of fear, confusion, and resignation. They are thrust into a world where their value is measured by their ability to please and serve, not by their desires or aspirations. Jealousy and rivalry. The presence of multiple wives breeds an undercurrent of jealousy and competition. Each woman is aware that Noor's attention is fleeting and transactional. The older wives may feel bitterness toward the younger, more favored ones, while the younger wives may feel both envy and fear, jealousy of the first wife's former intimacy, fear of being replaced or neglected. Longing and grief. There is a persistent sense of longing for lost freedom, for the families and lives they left behind, for the possibility of love that is not transactional or coerced. Nadia, in particular, mourns the transformation of her husband from a loving partner to a distant, radicalized leader. The wives grieve not only for themselves, but for each other, recognizing their shared captivity even as they are pitted against one another. 2. The maids and housekeepers. Invisibility and exploitation. The maids, drawn from various ethnic backgrounds, are largely invisible in the eyes of Noor and his guests. Their labor is constant and unacknowledged. They are expected to anticipate every need, to be silent and efficient, to blend into the background. Any mistake or perceived disrespect could result in punishment or dismissal. Fear and submission. Many maids live in fear not just of Noor, but of the entire system that enables his power. They have witnessed or heard of punishments for disobedience, and they know that their own safety depends on remaining compliant and unnoticed. Some may have been trafficked or forced into service, deepening their trauma and sense of helplessness. Solidarity and quiet resistance. Despite the oppressive environment, there are moments of quiet solidarity among the maids and even between the wives and maids. A shared glance, a whispered word of comfort, or a small act of kindness becomes a lifeline. These moments are rare but deeply meaningful, offering a glimmer of humanity in an otherwise dehumanizing world. Atmosphere and emotional tone. The hotel, though outwardly luxurious, is emotionally stifling for the women. The opulence only highlights their lack of freedom. The wives and maids move through the space with careful steps, their emotions tightly controlled. Beneath the surface, there is a simmering mix of sadness, resentment, and a desperate hope for escape or change. Sample internal monologue from Nadia's perspective. I watch him, my husband, once gentle, now a stranger, reclining in the center of this gilded cage. Around him, we orbit like moons, each of us caught in his gravity, each of us diminished. I remember Paris, laughter, the promise of a life built together. Now I am one of four, my voice lost in the chorus of obedience. The maids move silently, eyes downcast, their hands trembling as they pour tea. I want to reach for them, to tell them I see them, that I am seen. But I am as powerless as they are. We are all prisoners here, gilded or not. Summary table. Emotional states. Group. Key emotions. Causes/triggers. Wives. Isolation, jealousy, grief. Polygamy. Loss of agency, rivalry, lost dreams. Maids. Fear, invisibility, fatigue. Exploitation. Threat of punishment, overwork. Both. Helplessness, longing. Noor's authority, cultural/religious expectations. In summary, the emotional experience of Muhammad Noor's wives and maids in the hotel is defined by powerlessness, fear, and a deep sense of loss. Their lives, though surrounded by luxury, are marked by longing, rivalry, and the quiet endurance of suffering. Moments of solidarity and memory offer brief respite, but the dominant mood is one of captivity and resignation. Let's focus on Nadia's emotional experience as she witnesses her husband, Muhammad Noor, surrounded by his 4 wives, including herself and other maids in the hotel. Nadia's emotional state in the hotel scene. As Muhammad Noor enters the hotel, he is surrounded by his 4 wives and a retinue of maids and servants. For Nadia, the first wife and an American convert, this scene is emotionally overwhelming and deeply painful. She watches as her husband openly displays affection, kissing, hugging, and caressing his other, much younger wives and even some of the maids. Many of these girls are underage, and their presence as both wives and servants is a stark reminder of the power imbalance and the patriarchal system that now governs her life. Nadia's emotional response is a complex mix of jealousy and betrayal. She feels a sharp pang of jealousy as Noor's attention shifts to the other wives, especially the underage girls who receive his affection so freely. This is not the man she married in France, where she once believed in the promise of exclusive love and partnership. Now, she feels betrayed, not just by Noor, but by the faith and community that encouraged her to accept polygamy as a virtue. Humiliation and isolation. In the presence of the other wives and maids, Nadia feels invisible and diminished. Noor's public displays of affection toward the others make her feel like just one among many, rather than a cherished partner. The cultural and emotional distance between her and the other women, many of whom are much younger and from different backgrounds, deepens her sense of isolation. Resentment and powerlessness. Nadia's resentment grows as she realizes how little control she has over her own life and marriage. The rules of the household, dictated by Noor and reinforced by religious authority, leave her with no voice and no recourse. She is expected to accept her husband's behavior in silence, to suppress her pain, and to perform her role as a dutiful wife. Grief and longing. Nadia mourns the loss of her former life and the intimacy she once shared with Noor. She longs for the days when she was his only love, before the reality of polygamy and the harshness of their new environment shattered her illusions. Confusion and self-doubt. Nadia questions her own choices, her conversion, her marriage, her willingness to follow Noor into this world. She wonders if she has lost herself in the process and whether she will ever be able to reclaim her sense of identity and self-worth. In this emotionally charged scene, Nadia's pain is compounded by the knowledge that she cannot express her feelings openly. To do so would risk punishment, further isolation, or accusations of rebellion. She is forced to internalize her suffering, presenting a calm exterior while her heart aches with loneliness and regret. Here is a short interior monologue for Nadia, focusing on how her emotions affect her interactions with the other wives and maids as she witnesses her husband Noor's affection toward them. He's laughing again, his arm draped around the shoulders of the youngest wife, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Nadia stands at the edge of the room, hands folded tightly, watching Noor kiss the girl's forehead as if she were a prize he'd just won. The other wives giggle, their eyes darting between Noor and each other, competing for his attention. The maids hover nearby, silent and watchful, their faces carefully blink. Inside, Nadia feels a cold ache spreading through her chest. She tries to remind herself that this is what she agreed to, that polygamy is a part of this world, that she is supposed to be above jealousy. But the words taste bitter. Each time Noor's hand lingers on another's arm, each time he whispers something that makes them smile, Nadia feels herself shrinking, becoming smaller and more invisible. She wants to look away, to retreat into herself, but she cannot. If she turns her back, the others will see her weakness. If she speaks, her voice will tremble. So she stands still, her smile frozen, her eyes fixed on a spot just above Noor's head. She forces herself to nod when spoken to murmur polite words to the maids, to pretend she is unaffected. But the truth is, she feels alone in a room full of people. The other wives sense her distance and respond in kind, some with pity, some with quiet triumph. The maids, sensing the tension, avoid her gaze, their own burdens hidden behind practiced obedience. Nadia's words become clipped, her gestures mechanical. She withdraws, not just from Noor, but from everyone, building a wall of silence around her heart. She wonders if Noor notices. She wonders if he cares. And as the evening wears on, Nadia's longing for connection is replaced by a numb resignation. She is a guest in her own marriage, a stranger among women who share her fate but not her heart. She wonders how much longer she can endure this, and what will be left of her when she finally stops feeling anything at all. This monologue captures Nadia's internal struggle, her jealousy, isolation, and the way her pain shapes her interactions, making her more distant and guarded with both the other wives and the maids. Here's a dramatic scene that explores the emotional states of both Muhammad, Noor, and Nadia as the airstrikes begin in the small town, weaving in their interior monologues and the reactions of the wives and maids. This scene is based on the context and emotional arcs established in the novel. Scene: the hotel, just before dawn. The air in the hotel is thick with incense and the low murmur of women's voices. Muhammad Noor sits at the center of the lavish suite, surrounded by his 4 wives and a handful of young maids. He is the axis of the room, his presence commanding, his voice low and confident as he recounts stories of faith and struggle. The youngest wife, barely more than a girl, sits close to his side, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The other wives, including Nadia, watch him with varying degrees of longing, jealousy, and resignation. Nadia sits apart, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She watches as Noor laughs and pulls the youngest wife into his arms, kissing her lips. The maids giggle nervously, glancing at Nadia, unsure whether to envy or pity her. Nadia's interior monologue. How did I become a stranger in my own marriage? I remember Paris, the way Noor would look at me as if I were the only woman in the world. Now I am invisible, a shadow in the corner, a relic of a life that feels impossibly distant. I want to hate these girls, these wives and maids who orbit him so easily, but I see the fear in their eyes. They're as trapped as I am, each of us clinging to scraps of his affection, each of us diminished by his need to possess. When he touches them, I feel a coldness settle in my chest. I want to scream, to run, to shake them and say, "You're worth more than this." But I say nothing. I smile when they look at me, try to be kind, try not to let my bitterness poison them. Sometimes, one of the maids will catch my eye, and I see a flicker of understanding, a silent plea for comfort, for solidarity. I want to reach out, to tell them they are not alone. But Noor's gaze is always there, heavy and expectant, reminding me of the price of disobedience. Suddenly, the distant rumble of explosions shakes the windows. The room freezes. Noor stands abruptly, his face hardening as the reality of danger intrudes on his carefully constructed world. Noor's interior monologue. They have come for us. The infidels, the traitors, the ones who would destroy everything I have built. I must be strong. I must show no fear. My wives look to me for protection, for guidance. Nadia, she is watching me, her eyes searching for the man I once was. I cannot falter. I will not let them see my doubt. He barks orders in rapid succession. Get away from the windows. Stay low. The wives and maids scatter, some sobbing, others silent with terror. Nadia moves to help the youngest wife, who is frozen in place, her hands clamped over her ears. Nadia's perspective. In this moment, fear unites us. The lines between wife and maid, favorite and forgotten, blur. I pull the girl into my arms, whispering words of comfort I barely believe. Noor is shouting, but his voice is distant, drowned out by the thunder of bombs. I realize, with a strange clarity, that I am not afraid for myself. I am afraid for these girls, for the children sleeping in the next room, for the life I once imagined and the lives that will be lost tonight. Noor's perspective. I must survive. I must protect what is mine. But as the walls tremble and the lights flicker, I feel the weight of every choice, every compromise, every cruelty. Nadia's eyes meet mine, and for a moment I see not accusation, but sorrow. I wonder if she will ever forgive me. I wonder if I will ever forgive myself. The airstrikes intensify. The hotel shakes. Nadia gathers the wives and maids, leading them to the safest corner of the room. Noor stands guard at the door, his body tense, his mind racing. This scene captures the emotional complexity of both Nadia and Noor, as well as the shared fear and fleeting solidarity among the women. The airstrikes on the small town where Nadia comes to meet her fugitive husband, Muhammad Noor, are depicted as a dramatic and devastating military operation in the novel. Here's a detailed description based on the text. Context of the airstrikes. Nadia, along with the other 3 wives of Muhammad Noor, a notorious terrorist leader, is brought by Pakistani police to a hotel in a small, remote town near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. The town is a stronghold of Taliban and Al-Qaeda Mujahideen, heavily guarded by Noor's bodyguards and local police loyal to him. The town is sealed off, and the hotel is under tight security in preparation for Noor's visit with his wives. The airstrike event. Irshad, who is secretly following Nadia to help the CIA capture Noor, observes the preparations and the high level of security in the town. She reports the location of the hotel to the CIA, who promise to act on the information. That night, Irshad waits outside the town, watching for any sign of the operation. Around 4 a.m., the quiet night is suddenly shattered by the arrival of military aircraft. Huge flames and explosions light up the sky as bombs are dropped on the town. The airstrikes are intense and sustained, continuing until sunrise. The bombardment is described as so powerful that Irshad doubts anyone could have survived inside the town. Aftermath and ground assault. As the sun rises, Irshad sees helicopters flying over the town and commandos parachute down, landing near her hiding place. She witnesses the commandos entering the town and hears the sounds of fierce gun battles in the streets. The commandos engage in street fighting with the Mujahideen, and the town is left devastated, with bodies of dead or wounded fighters scattered everywhere. The hotel where Nadia and the other wives are staying is the only building not hit by the airstrikes. The commandos storm the hotel and arrest everyone inside, including staff, workers, and guests. Nadia's fate is initially unknown to Ershad, who is unable to enter the hotel or get information from the commandos. Ershad's perspective. Ershad is left feeling guilty and anxious, fearing that her actions may have led to the deaths of innocent people, including her friend Nadia. She later learns that the operation was successful in capturing Muhammad Noor, but the fate of Nadia and the other wives is not immediately clear. Summary table. Key elements of the airstrike scene. Element. Description. Setting. Small, remote town near Pakistan-Afghanistan border, hotel under heavy guard. Trigger. Ershad reports location to CIA. Operation is planned. Airstrike. Nighttime bombing, huge flames, explosions, town set ablaze. Ground assault. Commandos parachute in, engage in street fighting, storm hotel. Aftermath. Town devastated, many dead/wounded, hotel stormed, Nadia's fate uncertain. Ershad's reaction. Guilt, fear for Nadia, realization of the operation's human cost. In essence, the airstrikes are depicted as a sudden, overwhelming military intervention that devastates the town, breaks the stronghold of the Mujahideen, and enables the capture of Muhammad Noor. The operation is marked by chaos, destruction, and uncertainty about the fate of those inside the hotel, especially Nadia and the other wives. Ershad's perspective highlights both the tactical success and the profound human cost of such an operation. The novel compares the airstrikes on the small town, where Nadia comes to meet her fugitive husband, Muhammad Noor, to the biblical punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah to evoke a sense of divine retribution and catastrophic judgment. Here's a detailed explanation based on the text. 1. Symbolic parallels, divine judgment and total destruction. In the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed by fire and brimstone from heaven as punishment for their wickedness and corruption. This story is often cited as the archetype of divine wrath and the obliteration of a sinful society. The novel draws a direct parallel between this biblical event and the airstrikes, describing the bombing as a heavenly judgment or God's punishment on a town that has become a stronghold for terrorists, criminals, and those who perpetuate violence and oppression. 2. The scene in the novel. As Ershad waits outside the town, she witnesses the sudden, overwhelming destruction brought by the airstrikes, the quiet dark night illuminated by the huge flames of bombs dropped by some planes. Airstrikes continued in the small town until Ershad saw the sunrise on the eastern horizon. The devastation is so complete that Ershad doubts anyone could have survived. The narrative explicitly likens the survivors' flight from the burning town to fleeing with the Prophet Lot and his family from the fires of Sodom and Gomorrah, or fleeing from God's punishment on the day of resurrection. 3. Thematic purpose. Moral reckoning. By invoking the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the novel frames the airstrikes as not just a military operation, but as a form of moral reckoning, a cleansing fire that destroys a place associated with evil, corruption, and the suffering of innocence. Sense of catastrophe. The comparison heightens the sense of catastrophe, emphasizing the totality of the destruction and the helplessness of those caught in it. Judgment on extremism. The town, as a haven for terrorist leaders and their enablers, is depicted as deserving of such a fate, much like the biblical cities were seen as deserving of divine punishment. 4. Emotional and psychological impact. For Ershad, witnessing the destruction evokes both relief that the stronghold is broken and guilt for the innocent lives lost and the suffering caused. The biblical analogy underscores the tragic cost of violence and the ambiguous nature of justice in war. Summary table. Comparison of airstrikes and Sodom and Gomorrah. Element. Sodom and Gomorrah, Bible. Airstrikes in the novel. Agent of destruction. Fire and brimstone from heaven. Bombs and flames from military aircraft. Reason. Divine punishment for wickedness. Judgment on a terrorist stronghold. Survivors. Lot and his family flee. Survivors flee into the mountains. Symbolism. Total moral reckoning. Catastrophic reckoning for extremism/terrorism. Emotional impact. Fear, awe, sense of doom. Guilt, relief, sense of tragedy. In essence, the novel uses the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah as a metaphor to frame the airstrikes as a form of divine or cosmic justice, a catastrophic, cleansing destruction visited upon a place of great evil. This comparison amplifies the sense of moral reckoning, the scale of devastation, and the tragic ambiguity of such acts of war. Why has Ershad become angry about the airstrikes? Despite her cooperation with the CIA and her desire to see Mohammed Noor captured, Ershad is deeply disturbed and angered by the airstrikes for several reasons. Collateral damage. She witnesses firsthand the indiscriminate destruction caused by the bombing. Many innocent people, women, children, and non-combatants, are killed or maimed. The town is left in ruins, and the suffering of civilians is immense. Failure to capture the main target. Ershad is frustrated that, despite the massive show of force, the main target, Mohammed Noor, manages to escape. She feels that the operation, while devastating, ultimately fails in its primary objective. Broken promises and guilt. Ershad feels betrayed by the CIA, who had promised her that Nadia would be kept safe and treated as a hero, not as the wife of a terrorist. Instead, the operation puts Nadia and the other wives in grave danger, and Ershad is left uncertain about their fate. She is haunted by guilt, fearing that her actions may have led to the deaths of her friend and many innocents. Moral outrage. The scale of violence and the suffering it causes lead Ershad to question the morality of such tactics. She is angry that, in the pursuit of justice or security, so many innocent lives are sacrificed and the cycle of violence is perpetuated. Summary table. Aspect. Description. Airstrikes. Massive, sustained bombing of a Taliban stronghold, town devastated, many killed/injured. Biblical comparison. Paralleled to Sodom and Gomorrah, divine punishment for wickedness and abuse. Ershad's anger. Caused by civilian casualties, failure to capture the main target, broken promises, and guilt. Moral message. Raises questions about the cost of justice, collateral damage, and the ethics of retribution. Here's a detailed account of the aftermath of the airstrikes, Ershad's emotional state, and the fate of Nadia and the other wives, as well as what happens to the terrorist leader Mohammed Noor and how Ershad learns about it, all based on the novel. Aftermath of the airstrikes. After the devastating airstrikes on the small town where Nadia and the other wives are brought to meet their husband, the scene is one of utter destruction. The town is left in ruins, with bodies of dead or wounded mujahideen scattered everywhere. The air is filled with smoke, flames, and the sounds of ongoing gun battles as NATO commandos parachute in and engage in fierce street fighting with the remaining militants. The hotel where Nadia and the wives are staying is the only building not hit by the airstrikes, but it is quickly surrounded and stormed by the commandos, who arrest everyone inside, including staff, guests, and the wives. Ershad, who has been hiding outside the town, witnesses the bombardment and the arrival of the commandos. She is racked with guilt and fear, unsure if her actions have led to the deaths of her friend Nadia and many innocents. When she tries to enter the hotel after the raid, she is told by the commandos that it is closed and that all detainees have been taken away. She searches the town for Nadia, but finds no trace of her among the dead or the living. Eventually, the Pakistani police take control of the town after the NATO forces withdraw, and Ershad is forced to leave, still uncertain about Nadia's fate. Ershad's emotional state. Ershad's emotional state after the airstrikes is a complex mix of guilt, anger, and despair. Guilt. She feels responsible for the destruction and the possible deaths of her friend Nadia and many others, as it was her tip to the CIA that led to the raid. She is haunted by the thought that she may have betrayed her friend, just as she was haunted by her earlier advice that led to the stoning of Scheherazade in Afghanistan. Anger. Ershad is angry at the CIA and NATO for the indiscriminate violence, the broken promises regarding Nadia's safety, and the fact that the main target, Mohammed Noor, may have escaped. She is also angry at herself for being drawn into a cycle of violence and betrayal. Despair and fear. She is left feeling powerless and traumatized by the scale of the destruction and the suffering she has witnessed. She fears for her own safety, knowing that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda will seek revenge on anyone suspected of betraying them. Fate of Nadia and the other wives. After the raid, Irshad initially does not know what has happened to Nadia and the other wives. She searches for them, but finds no information. Later, through media reports and her contacts, Irshad learns that Nadia and the 3 other wives are arrested by the commandos and flown to Afghanistan. The U.S. government refuses to allow the Afghan authorities to imprison Mohammed Noor, so he is transferred to a maximum security prison in the United States. Nadia is eventually reunited with her children in Chicago and is treated as a hero for her cooperation with the U.S. authorities. She is also entitled to a $50 million reward for her role in the capture of her husband. The other 3 wives are handed over to the Afghan police. Irshad is relieved to learn that Nadia survived and was not killed in the airstrikes, but she remains saddened by the violence and the suffering caused by the operation. What happens to Mohammed Noor after the raid? Mohammed Noor, the senior terrorist leader and Nadia's husband, is the main target of the raid. Despite the massive show of force, he initially manages to escape with the help of local police. However, Irshad later learns from her American contact, her former guard at Guantanamo Bay, and through media reports that Mohammed Noor is eventually captured by NATO commandos and flown to a military base on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. He is then transferred to a maximum security prison in the United States, where he awaits trial. His capture is widely reported in the media, and Irshad is credited for her role in providing the information that led to his arrest. Irshad learns about Noor's fate through a combination of direct communication with her American contact and news reports. She is praised by the CIA and is offered a $50 million reward for her assistance, but she remains conflicted about the cost of the operation and the suffering it caused. Summary table. Aspect. Details. Aftermath. Town devastated, many dead/wounded, hotel stormed, wives arrested, Noor escapes then caught. Irshad's emotions. Guilt, anger, despair, fear for her friend and herself, haunted by consequences. Nadia's fate. Arrested, later reunited with children in Chicago, receives reward, treated as a hero. Other wives. Handed over to Afghan police. Noor's fate. Captured by NATO, transferred to U.S. prison, awaits trial. How Irshad learns. Through media, her American contact, and CIA communication. After the raid and airstrikes on the small town where Nadia and the other wives are brought to meet their husband, the fate of the terrorist senior leader Mohammed Noor, also known as Mohammed Noor al-Fransawi, unfolds in several key steps, and Irshad learns about it through a combination of media reports and direct communication with her American contact. What happens to Mohammed Noor after the raid? Initial escape. During the chaos of the airstrikes and the NATO commando raid, Mohammed Noor initially manages to escape with the help of local Pakistani police and his network of bodyguards. The town is devastated, but the main target is not immediately captured. Subsequent capture. Later, Irshad learns that Mohammed Noor is eventually captured by NATO commandos. He is flown to a military base on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. From there, he is transferred to a maximum security prison in the United States, where he awaits trial as one of the world's most wanted terrorist leaders. Media and official reports. The capture of Mohammed Noor is widely reported in the media, and his arrest is considered a major success for international counterterrorism efforts. The U.S. government refuses to allow Afghan authorities to imprison him, insisting on his transfer to the U.S. for prosecution. How Irshad comes to know about Noor's fate. American contact. Irshad maintains contact with her American friend and former guard from Guantanamo Bay, who keeps her informed about the outcome of the operation. After the raid, she calls him to ask about the results and the fate of Nadia and Mohammed Noor. Media coverage. News of Mohammed Noor's capture is broadcast internationally. Irshad learns from these reports that her information was instrumental in the operation and that Noor is now in U.S. custody. CIA communication. The CIA and U.S. authorities also communicate with Irshad, confirming that her tip led to the successful capture of Mohammed Noor. She is offered a $50 million reward for her assistance and is praised for her courage and cooperation. Summary table. Event. Details. Raids/airstrikes. Noor initially escapes with help from local police and bodyguards. Subsequent capture. Captured by NATO commandos, transferred to U.S. military base, then to U.S. prison. How Irshad learns. Through her American contact, media reports, and CIA communication. Recognition. Irshad is credited for her role, receives reward, but remains conflicted about the cost. The fate of Nadia Noor's two sons is described in the novel as follows. After the airstrikes and the raid on the town where Nadia and the other wives are brought to meet their husband, Nadia is arrested along with the other wives and flown to Afghanistan. The U.S. government refuses to allow the Afghan authorities to imprison Mohammed Noor, her husband, so he is transferred to a maximum security prison in the United States. Nadia is eventually reunited with her children in Chicago and is treated as a hero for her cooperation with the U.S. authorities. She is also entitled to a $50 million reward for her role in the capture of her husband. The two sons are transferred to their mother in the United States, as arranged by the CIA and U.S. government after Irshad, the protagonist, advocates for their safe passage. Summary. Nadia's two sons are safely reunited with her in Chicago after the raid. The U.S. government ensures their transfer from Pakistan to the United States, where they are placed with their mother. Nadia is not prosecuted, but instead is recognized for her cooperation and is able to start a new life with her children. Here's a detailed account of the fate of Nadia's two sons, including the process of their transfer, Nadia's emotional state, and the legal/social context, as described in the novel. Fate of Nadia's two sons. 1. Context and background. Nadia Noor is an American woman who converted to Islam, married the French convert and terrorist leader Mohammed Noor, and lived with him in Pakistan and Afghanistan. She had two sons with him while trapped in the stronghold of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. After Nadia's husband became a most wanted terrorist, Nadia befriended Irshad, the protagonist, and together they planned to escape the Mujahideen stronghold. However, the escape was delayed, and Nadia was eventually separated from her children when she was taken to meet her husband by his men, who were connected to the Pakistani police and intelligence services. 2. The aftermath of the raid and transfer process. During a CIA/NATO-led raid on the town where Nadia and the other wives were brought to meet Mohammed Noor, there was a massive airstrike and commando operation. The town was bombed and many were killed or captured. Nadia and the other wives were arrested along with Noor and flown to Afghanistan. Then Noor was transferred to a U.S. prison. Nadia's fate was initially uncertain, but she survived and was eventually returned to the United States, where she was reunited with her parents in Chicago. Nadia's two sons, who had been left in the care of Irshad during the raid, were taken by Irshad and smuggled out of the Swat Valley. Irshad contacted the CIA, who arranged for the boys to receive U.S. passports and visas at the American Embassy in Islamabad. The process involved Irshad acting as their temporary guardian, securing their documents, and ensuring their safe passage to the United States. 3. Legal and social context. The transfer of Nadia's sons was handled as a special case due to their mother's cooperation with U.S. authorities and the high-profile nature of their father's crimes. The CIA and U.S. government expedited their paperwork and arranged for their travel to the U.S., where they were reunited with Nadia. The boys' transfer was not a typical refugee or adoption process. It was managed through diplomatic and intelligence channels, reflecting the extraordinary circumstances of their family's involvement with terrorism and subsequent cooperation with Western authorities. 4. Nadia's emotional state. Nadia's emotional journey is marked by trauma, relief, and ongoing anxiety. She is initially devastated by her separation from her sons and the uncertainty of their fate during the chaos of the raid. The news that her sons are alive and being cared for by Ershad brings her hope, but she remains anxious until they are safely transferred to the U.S. Upon their reunion, Nadia experiences profound relief and gratitude, but also lingering trauma from her years of captivity, her husband's crimes, and the ordeal of the escape and transfer. The novel describes her as deeply grateful to Ershad for saving her sons and to the U.S. authorities for facilitating their safe return. 5. Social and legal implications. The case highlights the complexities faced by women and children associated with high-profile terrorists, issues of citizenship, legal guardianship, and the risk of being treated as suspects or victims. Nadia's cooperation with authorities and her status as an American citizen ultimately protect her and her sons, but the process is fraught with danger, bureaucracy, and the need for advocacy from allies like Ershad. Summary table. Fate of Nadia's sons. Step. Details. Separation. Nadia is separated from her sons during the raid. Ershad takes custody of the boys. Transfer process. Ershad arranges for their U.S. passports/visas via the embassy in Islamabad. Legal context. CIA/American government expedite transfer due to extraordinary circumstances. Reunion. Boys are flown to the U.S. and reunited with Nadia in Chicago. Nadia's emotions. Trauma, anxiety, relief, gratitude, and ongoing adjustment to a new life.